The shape and size of an antenna is a function of its purpose. But whatever its physical form, it is designed to transmit and receive electromagnetic waves. Let us first consider a hypothetical antenna, the point source. From such a source, energy radiates outwards in all directions. Let us examine this process more closely. The radiated energy can be represented by a traveling waveform of this shape. The waveform normally follows a sine curve. We will consider one complete cycle of the wave. It is defined as one wavelength. We can relate the wavelength of the radiation to the antenna which produced it. An antenna which accommodates half a wavelength is the simple dipole. If we feed a signal to this antenna, an electron flow will be set up within it. The electron flow first produces a maximum concentration in this direction, reverses, then produces a maximum in the opposite direction. Flow reverses, maximum. This cycle repeats itself at the signal frequency. This electron flow creates a fluctuating magnetic field. Let us relate the direction of this field to the electron flow. As the electron flow reverses, the magnetic field is at a maximum, and the lines of force are in this direction. When the flow stops, the lines of force collapse. As the flow reverses, the field again reaches a maximum. The lines of force are now in the opposite direction. The magnetic field thus reverses its direction at each half cycle of the signal frequency. This is known as the H field. The strength of this field is proportional to the amplitude of the current standing wave. This current standing wave is 90 degrees out of phase with the voltage standing wave. At this instant, the antenna has a positive voltage at this end and a negative voltage at this end. When the voltage builds in the opposite direction, the polarity reverses. This changing polarity produces an electric field in phase with it. When the voltage is of this polarity, the field is in this direction. When the polarity reverses, the field builds to a maximum in the opposite direction. This is known as the E field. The E and the H fields thus build and collapse 90 degrees out of phase with each other and constitute the antenna's immediate field. This immediate field produces the radiating wave pattern. From the antenna, we can visualize the radiation as a series of grids propagating outwards. The vertical lines are the H component, and the horizontal lines the E component. Notice that the lines are at right angles to each other, that is, in space quadrature. Vectorially, these lines represent the peaks of the radiating waves. Notice that their direction reverses at the next half cycle. Since the peaks of these two waves occur simultaneously, they are in time phase. The traveling waves are therefore said to be in time phase and space quadrature. The polarity of an antenna is determined by the plane of the E field. To obtain a maximum signal, both the transmitting and receiving antennas must be in the plane of the E field. The direction in which the E and the H wave pattern propagates is determined by a simple rule. To apply this rule, we use any two vectors. Imagine a corkscrew action. If we turn from the E vector to the H vector through the shortest distance, the screw has advanced in the direction of propagation. This is known as Poynting's vector rule. In the next half cycle, the E and H vectors reverse. Applying Poynting's rule again, we see that the direction of propagation is unchanged. Although we have considered only peak vectors, any vector pair would give the same direction of propagation. Let us now consider what happens when the wave strikes a reflecting surface. We will consider only one pair of the peak vectors. As before, Poynting's rule gives the direction of propagation. On reaching the reflector, the E field is reversed, but the direction of the H field is unchanged. By Poynting's rule, the direction vector is therefore reversed. The same process occurs for each successive pair of vectors. The direction of propagation thus reverses when the wave strikes a plane surface. Let us now see how we record the intensity of the energy radiating from an antenna. First, we sample the signal strength at various points. Such a record is geographical, and we can join the points of equal intensity to obtain contour lines. It is often more useful to know the shape of the field radiated by the antenna. To achieve this, we obtain field strengths at a fixed radius from the antenna. We now use a vectorial presentation to give each reading a magnitude and direction. To plot this, we use a scale of circles. Along this line, the field strength on the selected radius is 3. So we cut the line at the circle representing strength 3. Along this line, the field strength is 4. So it is cut at the strength 4 circle. By continuing the plot in this way, we obtain a series of vectors. These vectors represent the strength and direction of the field. Joining the tips of the vectors, we obtain the antenna's polar diagram. The complete polar diagram is three-dimensional, and it enables us to visualize an antenna's radiating characteristics. Let us now review the basic elements of antenna propagation. A half-wave dipole, excited by a signal, will have an electron flow set up within it. This movement of electrons creates two fields. These fields, building and collapsing in time and space quadrature, form the antenna's immediate field. This immediate field produces the radiating wave pattern. We can represent this radiation by vectors. Associated with these vectors is the traveling wave pattern. The traveling wave is in time phase and space quadrature. The fundamental characteristics of this traveling wave and the means by which it was produced are the same for any antenna system.
Every death tower out there surpasses bioinitiative safety standards. The question is, do you live in a hot zone? With the GQ EMF 390, you can see the dangers before your very eyes. You'll see who's getting dosed, and you'll be able to discover the hidden dangers lurking in your home. EMF 390 detects electric fields, magnetic fields, and RF radiation. These death towers are not safe, and everybody knows it. For full specs on the EMF 390, visit our product page. The link will be in the description. It's only about $100. It delivers the information you need. You'll never leave home without it. The GQ EMF 390. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
This is a simple half-wave dipole. Viewed from above, it looks like this. And we can represent its radiation pattern as a series of expanding circles. It is often desirable to concentrate this radiated energy into specific areas. In other words, we wish to make the antenna more directive. To see how this is achieved, let us return to the omnidirectional pattern. Here, red represents the positive peaks and blue the negative peaks. The distance between two peaks of opposite polarity is 1/2 a wavelength. We will introduce a second dipole spaced 1/2 a wavelength from the first. If we feed both dipoles 180 degrees out of phase, we obtain this radiation pattern. In the plane broadside to the antennas, the waves are 180 degrees out of phase with each other. The waves propagating in this direction thus cancel each other out. Useful propagation has thus been achieved in two directions, by feeding the dipoles 180 degrees out of phase. If we feed the dipoles in phase, we obtain this radiation pattern. This time, waves in the plane of the antennas are out of phase. The waves propagating in this direction will thus cancel each other out. By feeding the dipoles in phase, we again achieve useful propagation in two directions. By adding extra dipoles half a wavelength apart, we can concentrate the radiated energy still further. Let's now review how bidirectivity is achieved. A single dipole with its omnidirectional radiation pattern produces a donut-shaped polar diagram. By adding a second dipole, half a wavelength from the first, we have altered this polar diagram to produce two lobes. By increasing the number of dipoles, we have sharpened these lobes. To aid this presentation, the antenna size in relation to the polar diagram is greatly exaggerated. These bidirectional qualities are thus produced by spacing dipoles half a wavelength from each other and feeding them in phase or out of phase. Three practical examples of this type of array are the broadside, the collinear array, and the end-fire array. All these antennas concentrate the radiated energy in two directions. In some cases, however, it is desirable to concentrate the radiated energy in one direction. To see how unidirectivity can be achieved, let us return to the simple dipole. A quarter of a wavelength from it, we add an undriven element which acts as a reflector. Again, we can view the elements from above. A wave leaving the antenna reaches the reflector a quarter of a wavelength later. Due to inductance, a wave of opposite polarity is produced. When it reaches the antenna a quarter of a wavelength later, it is in phase with the wave then being created. The resulting radiation pattern looks like this. Notice that in this direction, the waves cancel each other out, while in this direction, they reinforce each other. Unidirectional radiation is thus achieved by adding a reflector a quarter of a wavelength from the dipole. And the polar diagram shows how the radiated energy is now concentrated into one lobe. Similar lobes can be produced by adding suitable reflectors to our three typical antennas. Here is the broadside, the collinear, and the end-fire. The upper VHF region sets the practical limit to this type of array. It is more convenient to control the radiated energy and narrow the beam width in the microwave region. Because the microwave region is close to that of visible light, we can now use optical principles to solve our radiation problem. Let's briefly review a simple optical principle. Here's a plane surface. Light, striking it at this angle, will be reflected at an equal angle. If we arrange a number of such reflecting elements so that the reflected rays emerge parallel to each other, our reflector becomes a parabola. All path lengths from the focal point will be equal. Energy will thus radiate in a plane of uniform polarity and intensity. The practical parabolic reflector is three-dimensional. And this type of antenna concentrates the radiated energy into a single lobe. It thus provides maximum directivity for transmission with good capture area for reception. Other antennas can be derived from the basic parabola, such as the parabolic cylinder, the orange peel paraboloid, and the cosecant squared antenna. All these antennas are made directive by the application of simple principles. From the simple dipole with its omnidirectional radiation pattern, which produces a donut-shaped polar diagram, we can arrange the feeding and relationship of additional elements to change the radiation pattern. And produce a bidirectional polar diagram. We can further concentrate energy by the use of reflectors. And a unidirectional polar diagram is produced. The application of these simple principles facilitates the design of antennas which concentrate energy and increase receptivity in the desired direction.
Here's conceptually how it works. Each point on our dipole acts as an isotropic radiator. The circles are the waveform emanating from that point, sort of like ripples in a pond. Let's add another point a small distance away. The radiation patterns create both destructive and constructive interference, and you can see that the energy goes mostly up and down. Now let's add another point, and we see the radiation pattern focusing even more. As we add a final point here, you can see how all this constructive and destructive interference makes for a mess close to the antenna, but as we get further away from the antenna, things sort themselves out into a proper wavefront.
Every death tower out there surpasses bioinitiative safety standards. The question is, do you live in a hot zone? With the GQ EMF 390, you can see the dangers before your very eyes. You'll see who's getting dosed, and you'll be able to discover the hidden dangers lurking in your home. EMF 390 detects electric fields, magnetic fields, and RF radiation. These death towers are not safe, and everybody knows it. For full specs on the EMF 390, visit our product page. The link will be in the description. It's only about $100. It delivers the information you need. You'll never leave home without it. The GQ EMF 390. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.